My name is William H. Thomas, Jr., and my branch was the infantry. I was a grunt, as we called him, doughboy. I was at the Citadel. I had finished 2 years at the Citadel. The war started in '41, and I had started my sophomore year, and in December of '42, it started getting right hot as far as calling people in. And they said, well, if you enlist, you can stay through your sophomore year till June. So I enlisted in December the 15th of '42, and went on active duty in June of '43. And reported to Fort Jackson, along with the Clemson sophomore class. We were both up there. And you might say that we were on friendly terms, but we had some competitive things like competitive drilling that they'd put us out there running it. And from Fort Jackson, I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, to the cavalry. And it was what they called branch immaterial at that time, but we stressed cavalry tactics, which was reconnaissance. And the first thing we learned was how to retreat gracefully. They called it strategic withdrawal. So we learned strategic withdrawal, but mostly a lot of reconnaissance, and that's this kind of thing. Later on, I found out the advantages of some of the things I picked up in the cavalry. And I was to stay there on cadre, but they disbanded the last of the horse cavalry, and that changed everything at November of '43. Well, that wasn't hard to figure out. If I went to Fort Meade, Maryland, I could be fighting the Krauts. And if I went to Fort Ord, California, I'd be fighting the Nips. And they were closer to my size. I wasn't too big. They were closer to my size. And I'd seen, you know, when you'd come out of training in the day and they'd show you those films from the different theaters. And I saw that mud and snow and coal over there in Europe. I said, that's not for me. So I ended up in the Pacific. I went to Fort Ord, California, and was there for a few weeks, and then shipped out from Angel Island, which was the POE over there. Shipped out from Angel Island, and very luckily, I joined the 25th Infantry Division. I say luckily, because I came out alive. But I joined the 25th Infantry Division in New Zealand. They had just come out of Guadalcanal in New Georgia. And I joined them in New Zealand. We weren't there for about a month after that or so, and then we went to New Caledonia, little French island. And we did training there from February until about November. We loaded up and shipped out from New Cal in about November. Went back to Guadalcanal, did a dry run on Guadalcanal. Went to Manus Island and made up the fleet at Manus, and left Manus and went for the invasion of Luzon. Went into Lingayen Gulf on Luzon, landed there about January the 9th, and pushed on in, and I didn't last too long. About 5th of February, I was a radio man at that time, and I had crawled out from under a building with a walkie-talkie in my hand. We had started getting, I thought, white phosphorus, started getting it in there. And I was going to call back and tell our artillery to watch where they were firing, because they were shooting into our perimeter. And I got a call back that we're not shooting white phosphorus. So, of course, the Japs were all around us, say in front, side, back, all the way around. And at about that time, they had I think we finally cleared 47 tanks out of this little town, which was about 4 blocks by 4 blocks. But they had them dug in as pillboxes, and what they'd do, they'd pull them in there to those emplacements, and they'd back them out and pull into another one. But they had pulled one up in front of us and was firing, and one of our, what we call an M7, it was a mobile 105, you probably remember, had a 105 with limited traverse in the front and a 50 caliber machine gun. It pulled up on the side and fired on this tank, which was right off on our left. And I know that's what it had to be, because I retrieved the shrapnel out of my arm. And a piece of that thing came in and went through the radio and knocked it, Kingdom Come, knocked a hole in it, and spun off from there and went my shoulder. Well, I didn't know I didn't know what had happened. I felt like somebody had taken a baseball bat and hit me, and I started rubbing my arm like this. I thought the radio actually had bounced off of my arm, and then somebody said, "Thomas is hit." Well, I looked down. I had a handful of mush, and I got up from there, trotted on back to the aid station. They said, "Leave your gun." That's the worst thing I ever did. When I put that, I couldn't have used it, but I remember that. I dropped that M1, and I wish for that thing. God knows I felt naked, not having, you had your arm. You didn't put that arm down. And anyway, I went on back to the aid station. Was evacuated back from there to a couple of hospitals, and then was flown back to Leyte, to Tacloban. And from there, I got on a hospital ship, the Hope, and was evacuated to New Guinea, Finschhaven, New Guinea, and stayed in the hospital there for almost 3 months. Then, having been in that long, they reclassified you if you'd been in so long. And they reclassified me as a this and a that and a that. And I said, "Well, tell me something. Can I get back to my outfit?" And they said, "Yeah, you can go back to your outfit." I said, "Now, don't you, if you want an AWOL, you just send me some, but you say I'm going to go back to my outfit?" And I said, "Yes." I said, that's what I want." So they were up in the northern valley of Luzon at that time. And sure enough, I had to hitchhike to get back. I caught a tramp steamer out of Hollandia, from Hollandia to Manila. When I got to Manila, I got on a train to go up to I Corps. We call it I Corps, 1st Corps headquarters. Eichelberger was the commander. To go up there, on the way up, the train wrecked. The cars and engine and 3 cars came uncoupled from the back, and those last cars came down. Fortunately, I was on the last car that stayed on the track. The 3 in front of me went down over this place into a ravine. We got out and pulled a bunch of the people out. Couldn't get them all, but we got a lot of them out. And the next morning, I went back up. They said they were going to make the train up later in the day. Well, somehow I got on back up to I Corps and got back up. Caught a 3/4 ton truck with 3 nuns and some bread that they were carrying up to our outfit, some loaves of bread. They couldn't speak a word of English. I couldn't speak a word of Spanish. So we rode on back up in the hills to where the unit was at that time, and I rejoined them up there. That was about May of '45. And we came out of there in June and went back into a training site where, incidentally, while I was in the hospital, they released the prisoners from Cabanatuan prison. I don't know, you've probably read about that. That's the Ghost Soldiers, the book, The Ghost Soldiers. And they were just about 50 miles from where we were fighting. And they released those soldiers. And they came back into the hospital with me. And that is the worst looking bunch of people. You've seen these pictures of the Jews in the concentration camps? That's just about what those soldiers look when they came, our men look like when they came out of Cabanatuan. Awful, awful. They'd come down to use the four-holer, and it'd make you cringe to see sitting on bones. Terrible sight. And that was a shocker. That was a shocker. I got back to my battalion area. I went down and drew a weapon. The next place I went was over to battalion headquarters to look at the situation map, to find out where the front was, so I'd know which direction to run. So I went up there and got that, and the next day we had a bunch of Filipino pack people carrying some supplies up to the front. And I fell in with them, and I dang near died before I got to have to be in the hospital for 3 months. Cross those ravines and down and up those hills, and we were taking the hills along the side of this valley. And I got back up there, and I looked at this bunch of people. I said, damn, I must be in the wrong outfit. They'd all had, every one of them, I think, had that amoebic dysentery. And the eyes were sunk back in their head, and the skin was from ataburn, and everything was. I looked and said, Thomas is back. I said, well, I'll be damned, I must be in the right place. I think there were 62 left out of 188. And that's plus replacements that had come in. We'd get replacements and they wouldn't be there the next day a lot of times. But there were 62 people left in that company out of 188 men and 6 officers. We were at Crow Valley, that was the name of the training site, Crow Valley, Luzon, and I got the hepatitis. We were getting a lot of hepatitis, serum hepatitis and other things, because we were taking the shots, inoculations to go to Japan, occupation. Boy, they were inoculating you for everything. You can't believe it. You'd go one day and get 3 shots, the next day you'd get 4 more in the other arm. So I getting this hepatitis, was in the hospital. At that same time, I got word that my father had passed away. Well, that came on me before the hepatitis. I thought I was just depressed, but that hepatitis, it just takes you there. You can't eat, you can't. And I ended up in the hospital with that, and while I was in the hospital, now listen to this, while I was in the hospital and getting over that hepatitis, there was a guy from Georgetown, one of my closest friends here. My mail caught up with me in May, my Christmas mail and everything else. I hadn't had, they came in and dumped this stuff in my lap sitting in the bed, a pile like that, and I read through it, and it said, William Anderson is at APO so-and-so and such, and that sounded familiar. And I yelled up to one of the orderlies, I said, where's APO? I gave him the number. He says, oh, that's right down here at base, that's base. So I got in touch with this guy, and he came down, and we had a homecoming there on New Guinea. He was in an air cargo control squadron. They were flying in supplies from Australia. This unit was air unit. So let's see. So I got back to my unit, hepatitis, and the war ended. And that wine, he had brought me a quart of wine down there, and I gave it. The doctors told me they saw that thing sitting under my cot. I was playing bridge with a bunch of doctors there. I think I was probably a sergeant or staff sergeant at the time, but I finally got up a bridge game. And they said, "What you got down there?" I said, "I got a quart of wine. When I get out of here, I'm going to finish that thing off." They said, "Listen, if you know what's good for you, you won't take a drink for 6 months. You've had hepatitis, and that's a must. You will not drink for 6 months." So those guys came down to visit me. I said, "I got something for you." I cried tears like a baby. I said, "Here." I gave them that quart of wine. And that night, the war ended in VJ Day. They said they were sitting at the theater, and they cut the lights off in the theater and said, Japan has surrendered. Don't you know that was a treat? So from there, we went to Japan occupation. We loaded up down on Lingayen Gulf, right where we had landed to go in the invasion. Went from there to Japan and got over to Japan about, I guess, latter part of November. And I got back to the States. I had a cousin, first cousin from here in Georgetown, Marvin Thomas. He and I had chased one another all over the Pacific. When I was in New Guinea, he'd be somewhere else. Finally, I was on Luzon, and he was on another part of Luzon. I got to Japan and was sitting in my room one day, and here he comes walking in the room. He said, "Bumpy," he always called me Bumpy. He said, "Bumpy, I just want to let you know, I'm leaving for home tomorrow." I said, "You son of a gun, I won't be far behind you." We were counting points at that time, remember? Huh? I'd gotten up to 80 some odd points. I knew I wasn't too far behind. Sure enough, first of the year I was back home. I know one bad thing happened that night. Right in the middle of the night, boy, we did first thing in the morning, about midnight, whatever. These ambulances started coming in. I mean, pouring into the area. And what had happened, there were a bunch of mortar. There was a mortar unit out in the field, and they got word out in the field. They told them about the war being over, and they started throwing those mortars in and got careless with them and had a bad accident out there. So I got back to Camp Gordon, Georgia. I left Japan about, I guess, around the 20th of December. Came up to Columbia River. Boy, I remember when that boat was waiting off to come up the Columbia River that morning. And I'd been in the signal outfit, and I could read lights. So they were flashing one another. And I read it and said, "The pilot will come aboard at around 5:30. I think I'd been on deck since 3 o'clock. And they said, "The pilot will be coming on at something like 5:30 in the morning. And that'll be about sunrise." And boy, I'm telling you, that was one of those red skies at dawning. That sun came up and that sky lit up blood red, and here we started up the Columbia River and came on up to Vancouver Barracks, right across from Portland. Portland. Yeah, right across from Portland. And from there, caught a train back to Camp Gordon. Mustered out at Camp Gordon on January the 15th, 46. We were supposed to go into Nagoya when we first landed in Japan. We were the first troops to get in there. But they had not cleared all the mines, our mines, out of Nagoya Harbor. So we went into Wakayama, and Wakayama was flat. That's a big city. Huh? It was. You saw these concrete buildings standing up there, like a few, high-rise buildings there, but everything else was flat. But those people, I went down to see some fellows in the hospital, and when I came out of that hospital, I didn't know exactly where the highway was around there, and I asked this guard on the door, I said, where's the highway to get back out to Taramatsu? That's where we were, at Taramatsu. I said, where's the highway? He said, it's about 5 blocks down this way. Okay. So I took off, walking. I think there might have been someone with me. Seemed to me there was. I started walking, and I walked to go towards that, and all of a sudden, I looked around me, and it dawned on me that I was the only, or he and I were the only white skins. Huh? And we walked, and those people didn't give us a second glance. And now this was 2 months maybe after the war ended. When that emperor told them it was over, it was over. Until probably 4 years ago, they'd never been out of the Pacific. They'd never been anywhere but the Pacific, because the 25th was formed from what they call the old Hawaiian Division. They made three, Schofield Barracks. They made 3 divisions out of the one. They made the 25th, the 24th, and what they call the Americal. Do you remember hearing the name Americal? That was the other. Those 3 divisions. When the war, they took a regiment of each one and formed a new division. As fine a guy as ever was. I still call him, thank God, and I got to do it. It's been a while. His name is Spence Yates, and our call sign was Spence. Spence 1 was his. Missouri.
How about the rest of the company officers? Were they?
They were from all around. We had Donald J. DeBlaw was from New Iberia, Louisiana. And we had one from South Carolina and California, and I forget where the other one was from.
How about your NCOs? Were they good?
Top notch.
You were very
Top.
important.
Well, see, they were most of them were regular Army, and the third gen. I'd call them third generation. I've got a picture of the unit just before it went in, an old Schofield Barracks picture of the unit, and I can pick out the different ones in there that, like a platoon sergeant, Squirrel Melvin, is an old fellow. We call him Squirrel Melvin. Yeah, there were some good ones. You knew who you could depend on, and well, of course, that was pretty generally all the way across. But you know, you had to function with them.
Yeah,
that was the big thing. That same fellow that was in, I want this on record too. That same guy that I told you that I ran into in New Guinea, William Anderson from here. William and I used to talk and say, I tell you what, if we can just ever get back to Georgetown and hear that town clock ring. Yes, that's all we wanted to get back. We'll dig ditches or whatever else that comes available, but we just want to get back and hear that town clock ring. The music Because I've always loved music all my life, but the music from World War II and some of those songs that stay with you. But I remember the first song that I remember when we got up to Fort Jackson, that PA system would click on, you know, hey, you could hear it like on MASH, you can hear that thing click on. And here's this song, no letter today. I have waited since dawn. No letter today. You remember that one?
Yes.
When that war started, I know every one of us felt the same way. Well, God, if we don't get in it, they'll never win it. Huh? Absolutely. Like I told you, and that sergeant tried to get me to re-enlist, and I was about to go across the desk after him. I came back home, and occasionally I'd go up Front Street. Old Mr. Manus, Chippy Manus' father, was a barber here. And Chippy's older brother, Raymond, was in the unit, the National Guard unit here when they went into service. He went with them all through the war and came back. And when they reorganized the Guard, Raymond went into it. Every time I'd see him, Raymond would say, Billy, we reorganized the Guard. You ought to come down there on Monday night and see what we're doing. I said, Raymond, thank you, but no thank you. I said, I think I've had enough of that. And I'd see Raymond a couple of weeks later. Billy, you ought to see what we're doing down here. We're reorganizing the Guard, and we ought to come down. This went on for a while. I said, well, one night I'm going to go down there. So they were drilling on Monday night at that time. So I went down there on Monday night, and I saw these guys coming in there. And incidentally, when they mobilized this unit, they called some of us out of the typing class at the high school to go up and help type out the records. And I had been up there typing. I had sworn those guys in some time before that when they went in. But I went up there and I looked at that thing. I said, I know I don't want any more of that. And about a week later, I said, I think I'll go up there on Monday night and watch those fellas strut around some more. And I went up there, and I don't want that. Well, the third Monday night, I went down and signed up and did 28 years in the National Guard and went in the Army as a private and came out a lieutenant colonel in In August, my grandson got his commission Fort Benning, Georgia. He's doing all of it now. He just started Ranger School. He's been in all the other schools. They got umpteen schools they have to go to anymore. But you know where he's being assigned?
What?
3rd Brigade Airborne of the 25th Infantry Division in Alaska.
Isn't that
How about that? Going to the 25th Infantry Division.